Welcome back to the Longevity 101. If you are listening to this, you likely already know that the modern medical paradigm is experiencing a seismic shift. For the past century, allopathic medicine has operated under what I call a reductionist model. We isolate a symptom, we find a pharmaceutical agent to suppress that symptom, and we call it healing. If you have high blood pressure, we prescribe an ACE inhibitor. If you have depression, we prescribe an SSRI. If you have acid reflux, we give you a proton pump inhibitor. But what if I told you that the chronic diseases plaguing modern society, the cardiovascular events, the neurodegenerative decline, the autoimmune epidemics, the systemic psychiatric crises, are not isolated mechanical failures? They are ecological collapses within the human biological system. Today we are going deep. We are going to explore the intersection of functional medicine, systems biology, and molecular nutrition. We're going to discuss how the very food you put on your fork is not just calories, but biological information. Lines of code that instruct your genes, your immune system, your microbiome, and your brain chemistry on how to behave. Specifically, we are going to look at three primary defense and healing mechanisms of the body: angiogenesis, stem cell regeneration, and the gut-brain axis. So settle in. Whether you're driving on a run or just sitting in your living room, let's explore the miraculous, deeply interconnected universe inside of you. Let's start with the vascular superhighway. The biological term is angiogenesis. Angio meaning blood vessels, genesis meaning creation. Angiogenesis is the physiological process through which our bodies grow new blood vessels from pre-existing ones. Now, to give you a sense of scale, you have approximately 60,000 miles of blood vessels in your body. If you pulled them all out and laid them end to end, they would wrap around the Earth more than twice. This is an enormous organ system. Its primary job is perfusion, delivering oxygen and micronutrients to every single cell and carrying away metabolic waste. When this system is in homeostasis, you heal wounds properly, your heart pumps efficiently, and your tissues thrive. But when angiogenesis is out of balance, catastrophic pathology follows. If you have too few blood vessels, you get ischemia, neuropathy, and poor wound healing, which we often see in advanced diabetes. If you have too many blood vessels, you provide a blood supply for microscopic cancers to grow into dangerous tumours. Tumours literally secrete a protein called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, to hijack your blood vessels and feed themselves. Now, how does diet affect this delicate vascular balance? We know that a highly toxic, hyper-processed diet, one high in trans fats, refined seed oils, and simple carbohydrates, induces oxidative stress and endothelial dysfunction. When you have hypercholesterolemia, specifically elevated levels of oxidized LDL particles, it damages the delicate inner lining of your blood vessels. Environmental toxins, like the chemicals in cigarette smoke, cause direct cytotoxicity to the endothelium. But here is where the science gets beautiful. We can actively modulate angiogenesis using food. I want you to think of your blood vessel network like a lawn. You don't want it overgrown, and you don't want it barren. You want it perfectly manicured. Certain foods act like a biochemical lawnmower. Take green tea, for example. Green tea is rich in a polyphenol called epigallochettin gallate, or EGCG. At a cellular level, EGCG acts as an anti-angiogenic compound. It downregulates the expression of VEGF, essentially starving microscopic tumours of their blood supply before they can become clinically significant. Genistin, a bioactive isoflavone found in organic, non-GMO soy, performs a similar function. Tomatoes are incredibly rich in a carotenoid called lycopene, which has potent anti-angiogenic properties. And cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, contain brassicins and sulforaphane, which not only detoxify the liver, but keep this vascular growth strictly regulated. You aren't just eating a salad. You're administering targeted anti-angiogenic chemotherapy at a microdose level, safely and naturally. This brings me to our next innate defense system: regeneration and stem cells. When you were in grade school biology, you were probably taught that a starfish can regrow an arm, a salamander can regrow its tail, but human beings cannot regenerate. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of human physiology. We are regenerating every single second of our lives. Your entire gut lining, the epithelial cells, replaces itself every 3 to 5 days. Your skin replaces itself every month. If you surgically remove a portion of your liver, it will grow back. How does this happen? Through adult stem cells, specifically mesenchymal and hematopoietic stem cells residing primarily in our bone marrow. We have roughly 700,000 of these pluripotent cellular mechanics floating around, waiting for a distress signal from damaged tissue so they can rush in, differentiate into the necessary cell type, and repair the organ. However, the modern lifestyle is highly cytotoxic to these stem cells. High-dose alcohol consumption, psychological stress, and most notably, hyperglycemia, high blood sugar from insulin resistance, cripple our stem cells. When you have excess glucose in the bloodstream, it binds to proteins and lipids in a process called glycation, forming advanced glycation end products, appropriately acronymed as AGs. These AGs stun your stem cells. They blunt their ability to mobilize, but conversely, what if we want to hyperactivate them? You hear a lot in the media about expensive stem cell therapies, extracting marrow, spinning it in a centrifuge, injecting it into joints for tens of thousands of dollars. While that regenerative medicine frontier is exciting, what if I told you that you could mobilize your endogenous stem cells at the dinner table? Epidemiological studies out of Europe looked at elderly populations adhering strictly to a Mediterranean dietary pattern, rich in olive oil, wild-caught fish, leafy greens, and fibrous legumes. When researchers drew their blood, they found that these individuals had up to 5 times the number of circulating stem cells compared to those eating a Western diet, 5 times the regenerative capacity. Let's look at specific bioactives. Both green and black tea have been clinically shown to boost stem cell production. And my personal favourite piece of literature, a study conducted at UCSF focusing on patients with known cardiovascular disease and severe endothelial dysfunction. The researchers gave these patients a high flavanol, dark chocolate drink made from 73% cacao twice a day for a month. The result? The circulating stem cell count in these patients doubled. Furthermore, when they measured their endothelial function using a blood pressure cuff to test flow-mediated dilation, their circulation was vastly improved. Mother Nature has packed phytonutrients into these plants that directly communicate with our bone marrow, telling it to release the repair crew. Now, I want to introduce a concept that is rarely discussed in allopathic medical school, and that is food dosing. In pharmacology, dosing is everything. If I prescribe you lisinopril for blood pressure, I don't just say, take a handful of these white pills whenever you feel like it. I prescribe 10 milligrams or 20 milligrams based on your biometrics and the desired clinical outcome. Food is medicine. So what is the dose? Is it 1 blueberry? A whole basket? We find these answers in massive epidemiological studies like the EPIC study in Europe or NHANES in the United States, which track hundreds of thousands of patients over decades. By correlating dietary intake with disease outcomes, we can establish therapeutic thresholds. For instance, the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study at Harvard looked at 70,000 men. They found that men who consumed 2 to 3 cups of cooked tomato sauce per week experienced a staggering 39% reduction in the risk of prostate cancer. Why cooked? Because heating the tomato breaks down the plant's cell walls and changes the lycopene from a trans isomer to a cis isomer, making it highly bioavailable to the human body. Half a cup of cooked tomatoes on your pasta, twice a week. That is a clinical dose, and we must expand our horizons globally. Look at the superfoods of the sea. Razor clams and oysters aren't just culinary delicacies, they are dense pharmacological packages. They are loaded with marine omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, which are the building blocks of anti-inflammatory prostaglandins. But oysters also contain specific bioactive polysaccharides. In the clinical world, we know that polysaccharides from medicinal mushrooms stimulate macrophage activity and natural killer cells. Well, oysters have a similar immunomodulatory effect. They are the mushrooms of the sea.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join the journey.
Let's move southward, down the digestive tract, to the epicenter of human health, the microbiome. For decades, the medical community viewed the gastrointestinal tract merely as a mechanical tube, a pipe where food went in, nutrients were absorbed, and waste came out. We viewed bacteria entirely through the lens of pathology, a leftover trauma from the bubonic plague and cholera. Today we know that you are a holobiont, a superorganism. You are composed of roughly 30 trillion human cells, but you harbour around 40 trillion bacterial cells. You are, by cell count, more microbe than mammal. These microbes live on your skin, in your mouth, in your respiratory tract, but the vast majority reside in your colon. This delicate coral reef of bacteria is responsible for metabolizing vitamins, regulating our immune system, and protecting our intestinal barrier. But we are currently witnessing a mass extinction event within the human gut. How are we destroying it? First, the catastrophic overuse of broad-spectrum antibiotics. And I am not just talking about overprescribing Z-Paks for viral colds. I am talking about the agricultural industry. In the United States, nearly £20 million of antibiotics are pumped into livestock every year to promote growth and prevent infections in hyper-crowded feedlots. Those antibiotics end up in the meat, in the dairy, and in the groundwater. We are ingesting microdoses of antibiotics constantly, decimating our microbial diversity. Add to this a sedentary lifestyle and chronic sleep deprivation. Did you know your microbiome has a circadian rhythm? When you pull an all-nighter, you disrupt the metabolic clock of your gut flora, leading to immediate gastrointestinal distress. But the most destructive force is the standard American diet. The FDA has approved over 3,000 chemical food additives, emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners, preservatives. Many of these, like polysorbate 80 or carboxymethylcellulose, literally strip away the mucosal lining of your gut. They degrade the tight junctions between your enterocytes, leading to what we call intestinal permeability, or leaky gut. When this happens, endotoxins like lipopolysaccharides, LPS, leak into your bloodstream, triggering a massive systemic inflammatory cascade. Conversely, how do we heal it? We feed the good bugs. Bacteria feed on dietary fibre and polyphenols. When you eat pomegranates, cranberries, and specifically tree nuts, almonds, walnuts, pecans, the bacteria in your gut ferment that fibre. In return, they produce magical molecules called short-chain fatty acids, primarily butyrate, propionate, and acetate. Butyrate is the primary fuel source for your colon cells. It heals the gut lining and exerts profound anti-inflammatory effects system-wide. To illustrate the sheer power of nuts, look at the data presented to the American Society of Clinical Oncology a few years ago. In patients with stage 3 colon cancer undergoing standard treatments, those who consumed merely 2 handfuls of tree nuts a week had a 50% lower risk of death from their disease. 50%. When a pharmaceutical drug shows a 20% reduction in mortality, it makes front-page news and generates billions of dollars. Here we are talking about 2 handfuls of almonds, modulating the microbiome and the immune system so powerfully that it halts the progression of oncology. This brings me to my final, and perhaps most crucial point of our discussion today: the connection between what we eat, our metabolic health, and our minds. I'm talking about the gut-brain axis and metabolic psychiatry. Mental illness is the defining epidemic of our generation. The rates of major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety, bipolar disorder, and neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are skyrocketing. Traditionally, psychiatry has treated these conditions strictly from the neck up. We theorized that depression was simply a chemical imbalance, a deficiency of serotonin or dopamine. and we prescribed medications to trap those neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft. But clinical observations and emerging research have revealed a stunning bidirectional relationship between metabolic disease and psychiatric conditions. If you are insulin resistant, overweight, or have type 2 diabetes, your risk of severe depression is exponentially higher. Conversely, if you have a psychiatric illness, your risk of suffering a myocardial infarction, a heart attack, or developing metabolic syndrome is drastically elevated. Why? Because the body is one unified biological web. We now understand that mental illness, in a vast majority of cases, is an inflammatory problem. It is neuroinflammation. When you consume a diet high in refined carbohydrates, sugar, and ultra-processed foods, several things happen simultaneously. First, your blood sugar spikes, causing hyperinsulinemia. Second, as we discussed, your microbiome shifts into dysbiosis, and your gut becomes leaky. Those bacterial endotoxins, LPS, enter your bloodstream. Your immune system spots these foreign invaders and releases inflammatory cytokines, specifically interleukin-6 and TNF-alpha. These inflammatory messengers travel through your vascular system, and guess what? They cross the blood-brain barrier. Once inside the brain, these inflammatory cytokines activate your brain's resident immune cells, called microglia. When microglia are activated by inflammation, they stop doing their normal job of maintaining healthy synapses and instead start spraying neurotoxic chemicals, trying to fight off an imaginary infection. The result? The delicate balance of your neurotransmitters is utterly destroyed. Serotonin synthesis is shunted. Instead of making serotonin from the amino acid tryptophan, your inflamed brain converts tryptophan into a neurotoxic compound called quinolinic acid. Your dopamine receptors blunt. Your brain chemistry gets completely screwed up. Not because of a genetic failure, but because your brain is literally on fire from the food you ate. Your brain cannot feel physical pain. It doesn't have pain receptors like your skin. If your brain is inflamed, you don't feel a headache. You feel depression. You feel brain fog. You feel crippling anxiety. You experience panic attacks, or ADHD symptoms, or severe mood lability. I have seen this in my own clinical practice time and time again. A patient comes in on 3 different psychiatric medications, barely functioning. But they also have pre-diabetes, profound visceral adiposity, and severe gastrointestinal distress. We don't just tweak their psychiatric meds, we fundamentally change their metabolic state. We remove the neurotoxic triggers, the refined sugars, the processed seed oils, the artificial additives. We stabilize their insulin levels. We flood their system with polyphenols, omega-3 fatty acids to repair the neuronal membranes, and prebiotic fibers to heal the microbiome. We close up the leaky gut, and within months something miraculous happens. As the systemic inflammation drops, as the insulin sensitivity is restored, the neuroinflammation subsides. The microglia calm down. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, increases, allowing the brain to grow new, healthy neural pathways. And the patient looks at me and says, "Doctor, my panic attacks are gone, my depression has lifted, I feel like myself for the first time in a decade." How did that happen? Because we stopped treating the brain as an isolated organ floating in a jar. We treated the human being as a complete, interconnected ecosystem. We are living in an era of profound scientific enlightenment, but it requires us to take radical responsibility for our daily choices. You do not have to be a victim of your genetics. You do not have to wait for your physiological systems to break down so you can be placed on a lifelong regimen of symptom-managing pharmaceuticals. You possess a miraculous, self-healing, self-regulating biological machine. Your blood vessels are constantly seeking the perfect balance. Your bone marrow is ready to deploy an army of stem cells to repair your tissues. Your microbiome is waiting to be fed the right fibers so it can protect your immune system. And your brain is constantly reading the metabolic data of your body, ready to produce joy, clarity, and peace if given the right biochemical environment. Food is not just fuel. It is the most powerful pharmacological intervention you have access to. It is medicine. And the best part? You get to prescribe it to yourself 3 times a day. If this resonated with you, If even one idea from today shifted something in how you think about your health, please share this with someone you care about. This is exactly the kind of information that needs to spread. Not fear, not doom and gloom, but agency. The understanding that you have more power over your biology than anyone ever told you. Hit subscribe if you're not already. We go deep on functional medicine, longevity science, and practical tools for extending health span every week. And drop a comment below. What was the most surprising insight for you today? I read every comment, and your responses genuinely shape the content I make next. Until next time, take care of your biology, because it's the only one you've got.